Ryan Ray and Ben Samuels present Bring in the Closers, a podcast on making deals and doing business.
Do I consent to being recorded, I guess so.
Well, Texas is a single consent state. I don't know where you're at, so I'm assuming so. Welcome to episode 4. Is this episode 4? Yes, 4 of Bring in the Closers. Ryan Ray, alongside the man, the myth, the closer himself, Ben Samuels. I don't know why we put it closers. I thank you for allowing that S to be added on there. The closer himself, Ben Samuels. Ben, how's it going?
It's going fantastic. Fantastic Monday here up in Colorado. I'm actually up in Colorado Springs today, so I can't complain.
The sprawling complexes in Colorado Springs. Didn't you tell me your house up there is like, 16,000 square feet or something like that?
Oh, dear, Ryan. I don't know. I think we have to. We're going to lower the bar a little bit. No, I'm in about a 1,200 square foot apartment. I am building a property. I think what you're talking about is I'm building a property about 40 minutes west of Colorado Springs.
That's a 1,500 square foot podcast studio that you built. Okay, I got you. Outside the mansion, like a mother-in-law suite or something. Okay, a lot to get to, but first, we dropped our first podcast episode late for a lot of things kind of came together, but it's out, and so if you're hearing this, then you could have heard the first one. But just kind of recap. So we're on Spotify, Apple. I need to check Stitcher. I'm not sure if I put in Stitcher or not, but just about anywhere, iHeartRadio, anywhere you can find podcasts, we should be there. If we can't, let us know. We'll see what we can do to get there for you. But with that being said, Ben, I was thinking about this. I've recorded about 400 podcasts, roughly. Now, I know you're immediately thinking, how can I be so terrible at the job after doing so many? That aside, I can honestly say, episode 1, to my knowledge, there's only one other episode that might have rivaled it as far as feedback, and I had Alec Epstein, the moral case for fossil fuels, got a pretty good bit of feedback, but I think this got the most feedback of any podcast I've ever done, which got me wondering, single episode, what inspired that? And I thought, well, it could be Ben, because Ben's here, but we have episode 20 or whatever it is, the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect you're on, and didn't get. Yeah, I got one comment on that I know of. So it wasn't that. I've done 400, and it's not me, but it's maybe like the Power Rangers when they form together this big, gigantic force. Maybe that's what happens, and just culminated in the perfect storm.
You know, to use the word of one of the listeners, I think it's all about the fierceness that I bring to the podcast, and then it's the pretty face that we've got on the other side of the screen. We play off each other really well, you know?
Well, we do appreciate all the feedback and hope to get many, many more comments or questions or, guests on the show, whatever it might be. So be sure to hit us up. We have a couple spots you can do that. It is obviously we'll link to our LinkedIn profiles in the show notes. Our new website, bringintheclosers.com, is up. We are still working out some of the kinks, but it is up, so you can find us there. Or if you have a question that you want to text us, you can do that, and we'll put this in the show notes as well, so you don't have to memorize it, but it's 682-422-4105. You can text or leave a voicemail, and Ben and I will take those on the air, or bringintheclosers@gmail.com is an email. Again, don't worry about memorizing that. It's all in the show notes for you to pick up there. Just wanted to mention it, so you be sure to check that out. Okay, Ben, last time we talked about red flags. And we I think we hit that horse pretty well. So today we're going to transition over kind of a debate that kind of caught a life of its own on LinkedIn. I met someone a few weeks ago, and they said they had 30,000 LinkedIn connections. And I didn't say who it was, and it made sense why this person actually had 30,000. And I'm not going to reveal the name because they didn't give me the permission to. And I have, at the time, around 3,000. I think I got a little bit more than 3,000 now. And I just posed the question, quantity over quality. And my general rule of thumb on debates like this on LinkedIn is I like to hear what people say and then not necessarily flesh it out in long posts back or forth what my comments are, but just I'm thankful that people comment on my posts for starters, and kind of hear what they say. And so I got a lot of feedback, and so I'm curious, Ben, I think you said you had like 6 connections on LinkedIn. So what is your thoughts as someone who doesn't have very many connections? Quantity over quality. You can't really speak to quantity, obviously, but just quality connection. No, I'm kidding. I think Ben has like 3 times as many as I do. But quantity over quality, Ben, for something like LinkedIn, I'll be real honest with you. For what we do, I don't find a lot of value, and I've almost phased out posting or dealing with it. I have some automatic stuff that goes out, but I don't do Facebook really. Twitter, have some automatic stuff that goes on Twitter, and sometimes I'll share LinkedIn to Twitter. Don't really mess with Twitter a lot, and Instagram, don't really mess with that. So LinkedIn is really the thing, I would say, or if you had a mailing list, but quantity over quality. What are your thoughts, Ben?
I think the upshot of having only 6 or 7 connections is that each additional connection that I have is like a massive percentage increase over what I had prior. You say only having 6 connections, like you said it as like maybe a negative, but it's a huge positive because I can come out and say, I increased my reach by 50% in a day.
You have the fastest growing LinkedIn page in the world.
That's the maybe I should delete all the connections, start at 0 and do that from the beginning. Now, I think I'm sitting at about 5,300, 5,500, somewhere in there. In answer to the question, quantity over quality, I think there's good answers on both sides. I think it's definitely a double-edged sword for me. In terms of the people that I'm reaching out to and the connections that I'm looking to make, I would certainly, especially on LinkedIn, I would certainly gear towards quality over quantity, simply because if I'm reaching out to someone to make a connection, it's probably going to be one, I have something specific that I want to speak to that person about, whether it be because they represent a company that I'm trying to get in the door of, or they're involved in a deal or something of that nature. So I have a specific reason. Otherwise, there are some times where I'll reach out to people in similar industries, so that I'll connect with people in the midstream space or SWD operators, those kind of things, and that's a quality connection because I'm on the front end introducing myself and presenting what value that I think I can bring, and trying to seek out what synergies there are and where we can come together. I think we talked about it in brief on maybe the second episode of the podcast, and I don't want to badmouth anybody. We don't need to name names, but there are a couple of people out there on LinkedIn, and they're very notable. 2 of them, I will mention the names because I think everybody knows them, is Oleg and Bridget. I won't mention the last names in case the listeners aren't familiar with those 2. It is what it is. But I see a lot of their posts, and they have I think 30,000 plus connections, and then 100,000 plus followers. And I think a lot of that comes from their style of posting is more so to sensationalize stories and bring up things that aren't really personal and germane to the conversation. And so I like to have a much more narrow focus on when I'm on LinkedIn. And so I'm much more focused on the quality of the post, the quality of the connection, the quality of the comment. And so, I don't generally go and comment on something, and something I probably should be better at or could improve on is, I don't generally go and comment on something just to engage with someone else unless I have something to add to the conversation. I'm not the kind of person that's going to, unless it's a post like yours, because sometimes I like to just poke fun at you. But a lot of times, unless I'm going to take time to really digest the issue of what's being discussed and dive in, I'll just kind of be an observer. Which I think maybe, like I said, a fault of mine. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but on the other side of the coin, the quantity argument, if you're putting out content, so like this podcast, or if, the people that are listening to this that are writing articles and putting out posts and these kind of things on LinkedIn, I think the other argument for the quantity side is if you put out a ton of content, you'll start to get feedback back, and then through that feedback, you'll be able to refine the filter and then get to the quality space. Right. So I think there's a different model of, if you just want to kind of, it's almost like the throwing things at the wall and kind of seeing what sticks model. And that's totally fine. Right. As long as I think what it comes down to for me is, as long as you're doing that, but you're willing and able and ready to take feedback and respond to the feedback in kind and kind of remodel the message. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I think I follow what you're saying. I tend to be more in the quantity camp than the quality camp, and the reason for that is that I found it hard to convert. So let's say I do add someone on LinkedIn, let's use that as an example, who is a person who can fit certain demographics for what I'm looking for. It's when we say quality, that's the quality contact, but that presumption is that person is actually active on LinkedIn and they're going to check their messages. They don't just get on once every 6 months and accept a friend request and go on. And to me, that's more of what I find on just about any platform I'm dealing with, or whether it's trying to connect with podcast listeners or LinkedIn connections, is that you get a lot of people who aren't actually actively engaged at the same level that I might be. And so if you take that and you said, well, and so the quality argument to me is almost a little bit too presumptuous. It presumes, well, so if I could list, let's say 100 people that I wanted to have on my database that would talk to me and interact with me on a regular basis, and they fit all of the criteria I was looking for, of course, that would be perfect, because with 100 people, I could probably do more damage than I would ever be able to deal with. The reality is that I have a lot of people I talk to. Sometimes they're busy and they can't get back to me, or sometimes they don't have what I need, or they don't fit all the right boxes. And so I need more quantity until I can fit in the quality. So it's kind of what you're saying, which is I need more people, because then, I may have person A who can fit 3 of the 5 boxes I'm looking for. So I'm going to take a deal to him. He might not be available. It might be in one of those 3 boxes, but he might not have time. He might, not answer the phone, or whatever the case may be. So even though he is a quality contact, it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to get that person for this particular opportunity. So the more people I have, and with that being said, I find this, that I can usually do a decent job of keeping up with messages and contacting people, so I don't get too overwhelmed by having a lot of people interact with me. And of course, if I had thousands and thousands, that'd be different. But the level I'm at, I can generally churn through the messages, get back to people when I need to. Some things do slip through the cracks. But so I think I'm much more, probably would lean towards the quantity, because when you sift through that, the quantity, I think, is actually greater than trying to do all of the work to get just those key 100 people, because it takes a lot of work to actually figure out, who's really dependable, who is actually available, when are they available, how far are they actually going to go. So if I have more people to go through, I feel like I'm a lot able to convert on stuff, if that balance makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just another way to look at it, but no, that's very valid. And yeah, I think there's absolutely value to having a broad network. That's pretty basic, right? I mean, having.
Well, I was gonna say, let's think about it like this. This is a serious question. Let's just take. We were talking about someone offline, Gary Vaynerchuk. We got the Dr. Evil cat there. It's getting serious. Let's take it like this. So let's take. You write down a list. A list of, Ben's, for the podcast listeners, Ben's petting his cat like Dr. Evil or Dr. No or whatever it is.
If you're not watching the video, maybe this is the one to clue in on the video. Maybe the first couple you didn't need to, but maybe this is the one.
Okay, so let's take this. Let's say that Ben could write down, or Ryan could write down a list of people, the people I think that would be fill out that 100 people. Realistic list, so not just billionaires, but a realistic 100 people list. Would I rather have that, or would I rather have Gary Vaynerchuk's platform and come out as Gary Vaynerchuk and say, I need this? Which do I think is actually going to be a bit more beneficial for me? And I would say Gary Vaynerchuk's, because I don't know if people listen to his stuff, I have no idea, but it's in the millions or hundreds of thousands. And from that, 2 things would happen. A, probably the person he's looking for will come out. B, all the other people who don't exactly fit the criteria but will open up all kinds of other potential for him are there as well. So when you think about the quantity, those are the ancillary benefits that if you can capitalize on that, outweigh the quality. And it's not to diminish the quality of the contact. I'm just saying, I think if we had a list of people we want to interact with on a regular basis, that'd be great. We could do more deals that we could handle. However, if we had Vaynerchuk's following and we said we needed something, we would get that, plus we'd get 10, 100,000 other things that we weren't even able to get before, because people would be trying to capitalize by partnering with us.
I think one thing that we should mention, I don't want to harp on because I don't want to go negative, but I mean, the other side of that coin is when you have a platform like somebody like Gary, you're inviting a lot of, and I use this word a lot. I think I probably use this word on every single podcast thus far. You're inviting a lot of noise into your network, right? And so if you're going to be going to the quantity model, I think that you need to have a very refined process to find what the actionable stuff is and what you should be listening to and who you should be keyed in on. Because if you're connecting to everybody you possibly can on LinkedIn, a lot of those people are going to bring you value. But unfortunately, it's also possible that a lot of those people just may waste your time. They may have, they may say something that they don't actually have access to, or they may purport to be something completely different than what they are. Any of these different things, right? And so it's important at all times to understand that if you're going to the quality model, we already talked about that. If you're going to the quantity model, you just need to be cognizant of that and aware that you may need. You may be creating more work for yourself to vet stuff on the front end. Is that fair? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I agree. So one clarification is someone like Gary or Kevin O'Leary or one of the sharks from Shark Tanks, they have staffs of people that they can direct people to. Hey, go call Bob and he'll take care of this for you. Go talk Sally and she'll look at this. So they have staffs of people that can vet through all that noise. I'm just saying, at face value, if I could be for a day Gary V plus his network with all of his connections and back end office work, or build out my own database, I would like to see what happens there because I think it would be. A lot more opportunities could present themselves just by the ancillary benefits of things that he gets. You would have a lot more noise, a lot more stuff to sift through, but he has people that can do that for him. So that's also part of that benefit. With that being said, the hard part for me is, and I don't have anything against Gary Vee. We'll just kind of use him because we use the name. The hard part for me is to get to that quantity without generating a certain type of content. And that's where I think the disconnect for me is when you think of part of the perception I think around the big numbers is you have to put out a certain type of product, whether that's kind of a hype product or inspirational product or whatever you want to call Gary's product. You got to put out that certain type of product, and that doesn't fit who I am. To put that out, this is who I am, and this is kind of fits what I like to do, and it's easy for me to replicate because I'm kind of be myself. And so I think my numbers will never be Gary's for a lot of reasons, but one of them is I don't really want to put out that type of content because I don't think I could do it for very long. I'd be very good at it, be very sustainable at it. And I think maybe part of that's why people frown upon the quantity models because they see these people and maybe they don't actually buy what they're selling.
So I think we talked about it on the second episode, if I'm not mistaken. But I've gone to the Grant Cardone 10X conference the last couple of years. I'm really pretty plugged into that to those speakers in that world, quote unquote. And one of the things that struck me that Grant talked about at the conference last year that I completely disagree with, and I'm completely on the other side of the issue, is he got up on stage and in part of one of his talks he was talking about, and he was kind of promoting the idea of hitting people over the head multiple times with the same message and just hammering people's inboxes and email and getting in front of them all the time, because the more impressions you make, the more impressions you make by sending someone an email, etc., the more content you'll get back and the more business you'll do. And I think, to be honest with you, Ryan, I think there are so many people that are probably wired just like I am that's going to turn me off really quick. If I get 5 or 6 emails in a day, every single day, or 2 or 3, or even 1 email a day from a vendor or from somebody hammering me. So I think that there's a disconnect in the message there in terms of, again, it's going back to quantity, but also quality needs to be tied in there, right? So like to your point about the messages, when Gary's getting on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram and talking about, generally, if you notice, his talks or his videos are only like 90 seconds long or so. And so, it's pretty easy, quote unquote, to pack a lot of value and get straight to the point in those shorter messages. And so I think to a degree, if you were like, I think if you were to try that model, you absolutely could do that. I think that you probably could put out multiple couple-minute videos a day and they'd be jam-packed with value. And I think the followers would love it. But to your point, that's not the model, right? And so, because you're changing your audience, I think is in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't watch Gary Vee much anymore. It's nothing personal. I kind of tuned in for a few years back and really was listening to a lot of things he said. Then I kind of got what his stuff was. I said, okay, this is good, it's valuable. But it's funny that you mentioned that because I didn't know who Grant Cardone was, but he went down to, you can find this on YouTube. He went down to Grant Cardone's office, and Grant Cardone was like bragging about how one of his guys got blocked from some auto dealership or something. And Gary's like, what are you doing? Basically kind of mocks him like, this is dumb and stupid. You shouldn't be doing that. I found that to be quite interesting. Of course, I learned who Cardone was later on. And I can't deny it works. I mean, those guys are obviously, they've got a few more dollars than I do, not much. I mean, they don't have Ben Samuel's money, but they're between me and Ben on the scale of economic wealth here. But obviously, it's working for them, so I don't disagree with that. I think for me, and this is a hard part. When I came into this business in the oil and gas energy space in 2005, I worked for my dad, and so for me, it's always been about. I say always. There's always been, and this is, I don't know how much this is actually real world perception versus just my own projection of perception, if you will. I've always felt like, okay, you work for your dad. People are going to think you're entitled. You're not very good at what you do. And listen, obviously my dad gave me some breaks and other people probably wouldn't because he's my dad. So I can't deny that. And I'm very thankful for that. However, it's always made me want to prove myself that I can do things. I can go out and close a deal or go out and land a project or go out and do this or go out and do that. And so, and so I always feel like on some level when I'm going into a meeting, we talked about this confidence last time. They obviously have this confidence, but I also feel like the other person almost doubts who I am. I need to prove my value to them so that we can get a quality relationship, hopefully, and do things moving forward.
I think it's really important to come into these meetings and to come into these conversations kind of regardless of what your standing is. I think the humility and the deference is really important. I mean, just yesterday, you and I were talking offline and you mentioned, I'm not going to compliment myself, so I won't mention what you said, but you said something nice about me. And I told you candidly, I was like, I really don't see that. I don't see, I don't see that the same way, but I'm really appreciative that that's the case. And so, I think it's important to kind of, keep a level head, right? And kind of understand kind of where you are in the context. And so, but I think at the same time, I think one of the things, and this might be stepping outside the fairway a little bit. I know I like to say that, but like with you and I think one of the reasons that we're able to get in some of the doors we're able to get in, able to do some of the deals we're able to do, and able to network with some of the people that we're able to network is because, we're not coming at this from, oh, look at me, I can do this. This is all me. I'm the best, etc. It's, how can I help you? How can I step into what you're doing and be of service and be of value to you? Like the same thing we've been talking about over every, I think basically every episode. It's been a common theme of being of service, and through that you'll get the feedback back. And to your point, I think through that you'll also get the validation, right? Because if you feel that way about your role in the industry or whatever you want to call it, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, right? So I mean, because if you're getting deals done and you're getting contracts and you're getting work for the guys that work for you and all of these things, I mean, like that in and of itself is proving the value, kind of regardless of what's going on up here, right?
Yeah, and so I think what I've looked at it as historically, kind of open up and lay down on Dr. Samuel's couch here, little confession time. So a couple things. One is, I've done podcasts to hopefully not sound like a complete buffoon, but put out something that people value. And I released a book, and then I was nominated and won an award, which was I was honored to win. And I did some speaking gigs, and I don't like speaking a lot, but I did some speaking gigs here in the United States and internationally. And so I did all that to kind of have, for those people who just like to look at the resume to say, hey, does this guy, does the resume kind of hit it? I was on I was been invited on the Blaze Network and a couple of podcasts. I kind of checked some boxes just to have those for people who you have, and that's a reality, Ben. Sometimes you just have to have certain things on a piece of paper to get past certain people. So I kind of did that in hopes of having some external validation. But when we said this on the first show, for me, when the going through the deal or closing the deal, or we're working on something right now, and we're kind of joking earlier. I sent you a bunch of contacts for something. And I was kind of giving you a hard time about the speed at which I did it, but there was a value. You had asked for something, and I'd given you back something, and so I know I was able to do that, and there was kind of self validation. If that deal closes, that'd be great. Obviously, there'd be some money involved. But with all that being said, I think one of the misconceptions here is that when you're doing deals, for the most part, it's not like they're going to write the articles and the headlines about you. You're not going to get, front page service. You might get a mention here, a thanks there, or an attaboy there. But it's, the saying that's lonely at the top. Well, that kind of is true about what we do. And so I think you have to be driven if you're going to be successful long term on the process of doing this, of engaging with people, getting them what they need, and trying to service them the best you can, because that's what keeps you motivated to keep going. And obviously the money helps and it's nice, but it's though if you don't like those things, it can become very depressing by how other things shake out and how you think something's hot and it goes to cold, something's cold and all of a sudden it's hot and you got to jump through hoops. So I think there's a lot involved on the backside of things, at least for me, that shapes how I view this stuff.
I like how you kind of like we're slowly getting little piece by piece of the Ryan Ray resume here. You keep talking up your co-host, but Mr. Ray, you've got quite a resume yourself.
Well, for the listeners who needed the sheet, I can provide it to them. Well, and the reality is, just to be very clear, I look at, so the award I have nothing to do with. Someone else nominated me for it, and I won it. But for those other things, to be quite honest with you, those things were tasks that I wanted to accomplish, just like closing a deal. So I went about them in a manner that hopefully led for me to be successful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and for the listeners, that's really important. I think one of the differentiators between people like Ryan and myself and other people that are trying to be, thought leaders and industry leaders and pushing the needle, I think one of the differences is that, just like you said, there are a number of things that I do, maybe not on a daily basis, but consistently, that are almost solely just so that they're on the list, so that I can, so that it's a check mark. I've done this. I have that experience. I've gone through that program. I've read that book. I've listened to that podcast. I've read that article. But whatever the thing is, there are a lot of things that it's just, it's critical to be, if you want to position yourself as someone that. Let me step back for a second. And again, I'm gonna toot your own horn because you don't do it for yourself. There have been a number of times over the last month or so that I have sent something to Ryan, hey, I'm working on X, Y, or Z with a client of mine. What do you think? And literally same day or next day, Ryan has 2, 3, 5, 10 leads or your messages in my inbox waiting for me to act on that are germane to that conversation and important and hot leads to follow up on. And that doesn't come, that's not something that anybody can pull together. That's not, that doesn't happen by happenstance. You don't just get there one day. That shows, that should tell everybody listening, and that tells me that you have a captive audience that has listened to your podcast. Like you mentioned, you've recorded over 400 podcasts. I mean, that's stellar. And for you to have the network that you have to be able to just put out feelers and, at the drop of a dime, come back with value. Like, that's the reason that people want to work with you. And that's the reason that you're going to, that you're doing as many things as you are, I think.
Well, that $20 a Bitcoin I sent you did pay off. I got my compliment of the day out of you, so I appreciate that.
God, I hope the editor could decide to cut that out. Nate, that's your cue. That's your cue right there. That lasts like 45 seconds.
Just wipe that out. That's okay. I heard it. It's good enough for me. But so let's go back to where we started, which was quantity versus quality. And so part of that, is, obviously there's been plenty of times where people have asked me for something and I've not been able to, to come through and don't have the right network and stuff like that. But if I have enough people I can go to, I feel like I can just about bring value on most things. Of course, we're not talking about the lobsters like we talked about in episode 1 or 2, whatever that was. That would be kind of a hard thing for me to do. But if it's kind of, as you like to say, in the fairway, then you feel like you can do it. But this gets into, and I think when you think about the quantity versus the quality, the other thing, and I think I may have alluded to earlier, is you got to be able to manage, how you talk to people. And what I mean by that is are you sending out a lot of messages? And they're not Grant Cardone pounding people's inboxes, but there are, either a message for lunch, or I saw this, can you tell me more about this? Or just responding to a simple comment on your LinkedIn post, all of that stuff, and keeping that machine going, because people are watching. And that's the thing that blows me away, Ben, is once you do, and not that me and you are anywhere near in the public eye, but once you kind of get out there and you start saying that, hey, you are someone who wants to do certain things, people then kind of watch you from afar. And they're watching the things that you do, and the next thing you know, you're like, oh wow, okay, this person actually has been following what I've been saying, or watching what I've been doing, and that's why they reached out to me. So, and I think that's the hard part. That's why I'm, I think like 3 times a day I should start my own blog, my own website. But then I realized I just, as much as I want to do it, I wouldn't keep up with it, because that to me is so, it's exhausting thinking about. And I see a lot of stuff I'd like to comment on, which is exhausting to think about that. And I think too many people, let's talk about this, because this is quantity over quality, not context, but in forms of content. I think too many people will go, okay, I'm going to go and share, and Ryan Ray is guilty number 1. I'm going to share 20 posts a day. I'm going to comment on 300 posts. I'm going to write 2 blogs. I'm going to be on 6 podcasts, and I'm going to release a book by October. And then like 6 minutes into that, you get overwhelmed and you go, oh my gosh, I can't do all this. And next thing you know, you're not putting out the feeler. So how do you balance that out? I know you said you're trying to tweak some things, but how do you balance that out to where you can put out content, and content, I use that very loosely, content very loosely, that's consistent, and you hope is good, obviously.
I feel the same way as you in a lot of respects. I have, so on zahavresources.org, I have a blog section. I think there's one blog post, maybe two, and I've had the site live for however many years. I mean, so it's not that I don't have ideas. It's not that I don't have things that I could write about. It's to your point, and to to the listeners, I think they'll identify with this. Really, what it is, I think, is just like you said, it's kind of a hesitance to, because once you dive into those waters and you kind of make the commitment to put out consistent content, you have to continue to do that, right? And so in order to do that, that could be a full-time job, and that's a whole different, you're looking at those things from a different model. And so, I mean, to your point, I think I said it earlier in the podcast, but I don't generally comment on dozens and dozens of posts on LinkedIn. I kind of pick my spots. But I think all of that said, really what it is, Ryan, I think realistically, I think that the market and the people out there and the listeners, I think that if you and I were to put out, 45-second videos of like, hey, this just happened, isn't this cool? Or, hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z, or, I'm thinking about building rapport, and here's a couple of just random thoughts or what have you. I think that is really valuable. And I love those posts. I'm connected with a number of people on LinkedIn that it seems like that's kind of their niche. They don't really share a lot of articles. They don't really post a ton of words, but they'll post, a minute or two video every couple of days. And I love those because I think the other thing that I definitely need to get better at, and actually one of the reasons that I really wanted to do this podcast and grow into this space, is because, in this day and age, it's really about connecting with the voice, but it's really about connecting with the person. And I think that a video is the best way to do that, right? And so I do want to get more and more into video. I think I asked you to actually start sending me the raw audio and video of these podcasts so that I can do some offline, kind of cutting and whatnot. And that's kind of my, that may be my first foray into this. But I think we're all kind of feeling it out, right? And both of us, we've got a considerable following on LinkedIn, et cetera. But there's a lot more that you and I could be doing, and so it's kind of always a moving target. It's just about figuring out where the value is and seeing what you can do to stoke the fire.
One of the things I learned a while back about myself is I don't like doing things by myself. So if I write a blog, it's me sitting down writing the blog. I probably won't express it. This is why I like to hear that. I like to see people engage on LinkedIn. I like to kind of read it, but I don't like to spend a lot of time responding because I'm not sure if I'm going to articulate. Not that I'm the best articulator on the podcast, obviously, but I'm not sure I can articulate what I mean through written words, even as halfway decent. But that being said, one of the things I've learned, Ben, is I like discussing the ideas with people. And I like to have a very robust discussion. And so that's why I like doing co-podcasts. Obviously, I have the podcast equipment. I could do, I could just do one-off podcasts and myself, and, that'd probably be terrible. But I have the capacity to do that. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. But I have learned that I'd much rather sit down and talk with someone about an idea, a concept, whatever the case may be, than for me to sit down and just to give you my opinion with no one else involved. And so we talk about content creation or quantity versus quality. I will do, up to a point, more quantity of things like this that I can because I actually enjoy it, and kind of helps sharpen me because you'll say something I didn't think of, or sometimes when you say something you think it's really smart, you say it and you go, oh my gosh, that's really stupid. So just saying stuff out loud for me sometimes has been a good thing. But so I think when you think about quantity versus quality on content, you got to kind of figure out, they say finding your voice, but for me, it's not so much finding my voice that has been part of this process, but realizing that I just would rather do it with someone else than do it by myself. And that was a big realization, especially when you're thinking about, closing deals and being the negotiator or being the person bringing stuff. You kind of want to have this aura of, you're the person that can do it, and you're this and that and all this stuff. And so it almost pushes you towards being a solo artist, if you will. And I found that, I just rather sit down and talk to people. That's just far more, it's easier for me. It's more natural for me. And I get more value out of it.
Would you also say that it's helpful to get kind of the immediate feedback from whoever you're discussing with, rather than like just kind of talking to a wall or talking to a blank screen?
Yeah, that's there as well, but it also helps me be consistent in it because there's a sense in which okay, I've got this show, I've got it's at this time, I've got to be on there, and it just kind of works around things. I mean, think about it like this: when I'm on the road by myself, which is normal. Sometimes I have a coworker with me, but pretty much by myself. Then I'll go out to eat. Sometimes I'll drive through, but sometimes I go sit down. And when I sit down, I put the headphones in and I'm listening to a book or a podcast or something. And obviously, I'm not talking to someone, but it is like someone's there with me because someone's telling me something in my brain. So when I'm writing, I listen to music some. Depends on how tired I am. But for the most part, if I'm writing, I'm listening to some kind of talk, whether it's podcasting, sports, politics, business, books, etc., things like that. And so I've always been that way. So maybe it's just I enjoy the conversation more than that. And the final thing I'll say is one of the things I always tell my employees at R-Sphere Global is I like the information. And what I mean by that is if you give me all the information, I believe, and I almost kind of have to believe this, that I can do the best with it. So if you give me all the information, then I can sift through it and make the best decision possible. That's part of what we do is making decisions and advising clients. So I believe that, and it's kind of a prerequisite to do what we do. So when I talk to people, I get information because I can ask certain questions. I can steer a conversation a certain way. They can ask me a question that might reveal something I didn't think about before. When you're doing one-off, you can maybe hone your idea a little better, but you're still not going to get that extra that extra input that you might have gotten from someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I drove from Midland to Colorado yesterday. It's about an 8.5, 9-hour drive, and I think for about 7 of that, I was listening to podcasts, and that I listened to a couple of audiobooks. And so, yeah, I mean, we're very much the same in that regard. And I think to a certain extent, that's also just the thirst for knowledge and the the drive to again, be a resource, have information at hand. And I think you only get that from just immersing yourself in that world, right? You really, there is no substitute for reading a book. There is no substitute for listening to a podcast because if you're not doing those things, you're not picking up that information.
Yeah, and so I'm curious about this. So, talk about books. So I listen to all types of books, but fiction, nonfiction, history, whatever, business, it doesn't matter. But one of the ways I've changed, and I don't know when this was, we'll say last year. I think it's been longer than that, but let's just say it's last year. I changed the way I listen to fiction books. And now, how I listen to fiction books now is obviously I listen to it and I enjoy the story. Okay, so there's that element of it. And if it's a really good book, you kind of get engrossed and you think about, the character and what's going on. But then the other thing I do is I try to step outside of the book and I think, what would I think about this if it happened in real life? So, for instance, and we're not going to get political on the show, but I'll use a political example to kind of illustrate the point. Let's say I'm reading a book about a CIA spy, and the CIA spy goes, and in the book, the guy he's going after is a super bad terrorist, and it's the worst of the worst terrorist. And in the book, and I'm making this up, but in the book, the CIA spy goes and gets the terrorist's wife, and he tortures her to get the information about the terrorist, and then he goes and kills the terrorist, saves the day, millions of Americans' lives lives. One of the things, millions of Americans' lives were saved. One of the things I think about is, in the book, I might find that storyline compelling. I might, and I'm not, again, making political statements here, just something off the top of my head. I might actually enjoy that storyline because if it's a good author, he can build to a certain point. But then if I take it outside, I might have the same view, a different view. I might tweak it. And I've learned if you can read fiction in that way, it actually can help broaden your horizons where some people don't want to read business books or history or whatever the case is all the time. There's a way you can engage with fiction, I think, that is actually helpful for the real world if you can bring it outside of that and kind of examine it. What would I think if this actually happened and I knew about it today? Does that make sense? And what are your thoughts on that?
Said a different way, absolutely. I think if you're reading a work of fiction, in my opinion, the author, when they were writing that work of fiction, there were themes that they were thinking about. There were topics that they were trying to convey. That, the story is trying to tell you something. And so if you're just reading a fiction book at face value, I think you're losing a lot of the value. I think you're losing a lot of the message. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to listen to it and read it within context and try to think critically about, what is the story trying to tell me? What's not the hidden message necessarily, but what are some of the underlying themes here? I mean, a good example, I think a generic example that probably most listeners have read most people have probably read 1984 by George Orwell, right? If you read that book, the book is about, there's a classroom, and then, the book is relatively generic. It tells a story. But if you think about the underlying themes and what that book is trying to tell you, and all of the sub context, then it becomes, one of the most seminal works that's ever been written, in my opinion. I think for anyone listening to the podcast, if you have not read 1984, please shut down the podcast right now, hit pause, go buy the book and read it and come back. It is phenomenal. I think it is really elementary reading for any American, really any person, but especially any American, especially in today's age. So that's my little 30-second elevator speech on why you should read 1984. But no, I think absolutely. I think you're missing a lot of the value in those stories if you're just reading it for the story.
Okay, so let's transition now. We've kind of talked about quantity, quality, content, connections. Let's talk about something we've hit on a little bit before, which is kind of this concept of work-life balance. And now we have completely different lives. Okay, so I am married and I have 4 kids. I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 3-year-old, and almost a 4-month-year-old. Ben, contrast that with...
I'm single with no children. I have 2 cats. I don't know if that counts.
2 cats. Okay, so Ben has 2 cats. I am 34. Ben is
31.
31. Okay, so just a few years older than you. So work-life balance. So as a single guy, I'm just curious. Let's get maybe the range of perspectives on how to deal with this, how you think about it. You had some interesting comments about maybe the conversation sometimes isn't directed in the right manner. So I'm curious, what do you think about this?
I think work-life balance is probably the most important thing in life, period. If someone can find a work-life balance, if you can find truly a work-life balance that works for you, and I'll get into that in a second, I think it can really be unlocking the key to happiness, however generic and however maybe whatever that sounds. I think it is so incredibly important, because by finding a work-life balance, and what I mean by that is finding a way to be present in whatever you're doing at the time, and finding a way to be content in those things. And so finding the way to be able to accomplish everything you need to accomplish at work, do everything you want to be able to, want to be doing to set up your future, and set up the next steps, and take the entrepreneurial drive, or set the foundation for your family, or what have you. And then on the flip side, being able to step away from work and really enjoy, going to the gym, or being with family, or going to a baseball game, or doing the things outside of work. I think one of the things, Ryan, to me, one of the most important things that someone can do in this realm is segment those things, so that when you're out of work and you're offline, quote unquote, you're not just thinking about work. And when you're at work, you're thinking about work, and you're not involved, and you're not, consumed with thoughts about the other stuff that you're missing out on, or etc. And I think a lot of that has to do with, and I know that you and I are very fortunate. And so I say this with a little bit of trepidation, because I know that not everyone is as fortunate as you and I are in this instance, in this scenario. But it's so key to find something that you can dig into at work that you truly enjoy, and that you really can get your hands dirty, and really challenge yourself, and enjoy the process. Because I know so many people, unfortunately, in the energy business that the minute that 501 hits, they don't want to talk about energy anymore. They don't want to talk about oil and gas. They don't want to. They want to be done. They want to go get a drink, and they want to, and that's totally fine. But what that tells me is that they're not actually enjoying what they're doing. They're not really. They're doing it for maybe the wrong reasons, or maybe for ulterior reasons that don't really marry up. And so, I totally understand people need to take jobs because it pays better than something they enjoy. And I understand that hobbies don't pay the bills. I understand all of these things, and I'm not trying to paint a picture of this grandiose, oh, you hold out for the job that's going to pay you 7 figures and it's going to let you only do the things that you want to do and nothing that you don't. That's not at all what I'm getting at. I think what I'm getting at is more so, I'm of the opinion that no matter what your job is, whether you're a field hand, a land tech, an administrative assistant, a CEO, you're a foreman, project engineer, whatever your role is, or if you're completely outside of oil and gas, we can go on the list forever. I think it's really important to form your day, and form your week, and form your month in ways that speak to you as a person, and that you enjoy. And so, and we can talk about this at length, but that's kind of the overarch. That's my kind of umbrella of kind of how I would set the stage when looking at things like that.
Yeah. So I think a couple things here. One, I mentioned earlier, I don't really do Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And Facebook, I hadn't dealt with in a long time. Twitter and Instagram, I just kind of deal with. And here recently, I've kind of just gotten rid of those. One of the things we deal with work-life balance is I think that so many people, Ryan Ray has been a big part of this, is you get caught up, and there's nothing wrong, nothing right. I'm just saying it's part of the equation. You get caught up with checking the Facebook account 15 times a day, or, when you get home from work, you spend 2 hours on the Facebook or the Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is. And none of those things actually bring work value. They might bring life value, but they don't bring work value. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so I think we're not the best at measuring our time, people in general. And so we fill our lives with a lot of things. And then we say we struggle with work-life balance. And the reality is, for Ryan especially, more than maybe anybody else, is that if you just cut out a few things here or a few things there, you would find that the balance is a lot closer to where you want it to be. But you filled it with things that aren't really bringing you value, but they consume your time.
So you kind of hit something that I was actually going to talk to you about this offline, but since you mentioned, I'll mention it, or we can talk about it briefly on the podcast today. One of the things on this podcast for me, I'll get a little personal for a second. So thus far through 3.5, almost 4 episodes, I've tried to toe the line between being informative, but also like being quote unquote politically correct, and not wanting to say things that are inflammatory and like outside the scope, or I don't want to push people one way or the other. But since you said what you said, I think it's so important. I'll get on my soapbox for a second. In this day and age, with what's available on social media, and when I say social media, I'm talking about Facebook, Instagram, some of Twitter, Snapchat, those models. I'm not talking about LinkedIn and the networking stuff. I'm talking about more of the social networks. When you consume yourself with those, I think, and really realistically, there's so much data at this point that backs up. There's not, and these are overarching, very aggressive statements, but you're not going to be happy. You're not going to find success. You're not going to find fulfillment. I mean, if you're filling your mind with all of the beautiful images on Instagram and all of the success stories that you see on Snapchat and all of the, keep in mind, and I've heard this so many times from people like Gary Vee and others, but keep in mind that all you're seeing on social media is the very, very, very top of the best of what those people have to offer, and only what they want to show you, right? You're not seeing what it actually takes to make that. You're not seeing the failures. You're not seeing the other edge of the coin. And I know so many people, so like you and I think we could probably look at those things, and the filter is there to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And so it doesn't really have an effect in terms of our psyche or kind of how we go about things. But unfortunately, I think that, especially with people that are maybe new in this industry or trying to kind of dip their toes in the water for the first time and kind of trying to find their voice and find, what they want to do and all these things. I think that in and of itself can be so demotivating, because if you look at all this stuff and all you see is the best of the best and all this stuff, you're going to sit there and be like, well, how can I start from nothing? And I think and also that, turning that on its head, just the sheer amount of minutes that you're wasting on a daily basis. Just by perusing perusing Instagram or Facebook for 3 hours a day. Can you imagine if the average, quote unquote, let's say the average 20 to 24-year-old, if they were to delete Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat altogether and focus all of those hours that they would spend on those things on starting a business, can you imagine how much of a unbelievably massive difference that would make?
Or with their family, because that's part of the thing, is that you don't have time for the family. So just spend the family. So I just looked it up. I have 700 Twitter followers. And I would say of those 700, I engage with like 4 maybe on a regular basis. And that's kind of the deal. Was I used to use Twitter because I could go find news. I could source news from around the world better than any other platform. It was amazing. Now Twitter wants to tell me what everybody, every political tweet that everyone likes and all this stuff. And I don't really care. Matter of fact, I lose a lot of respect for most reporters because I see stuff they like and I realize that they're not really that smart. But that aside, I don't need to see all that. I just want to know what the news is. But now with like something like Feedly, I can get all of the articles pumped to my feed burner, whatever thing's called, Feedly, and I can just about get it within a reasonable amount of time. And so Twitter has kind of lost its value because it wants me to see what everyone else likes, and I don't care what they like. If they retweet it, obviously I understand that, but I just want to see what the news was. And so that's kind of lost its value. But if we go back to the beginning, the quantity versus quantity, you somewhere like on Twitter, there is no quality metrics there. That is a strict quantity thing, which means that you really have to churn out good content or spammy content that uses all the hashtags to get in front of people. And that's exhausting. You do it and you get, 2,000-3,000 followers on Twitter, and 1,500 of them are just bots that like your account because you put the right hashtag in.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to use Twitter a lot more as well. I used to, run a couple of other podcasts and like fantasy football and some other things, whatever. So I used Twitter to be a news aggregator. But yeah, at this point, it's funny you said what you mentioned, because really at this point I find myself using Twitter almost sometimes. I use it as a filter to read the comments that some of these industry experts or media people say, and if they say something that is, like in this day and age, you can't even imagine what you're going to see on Twitter. And so
Right.
sometimes somebody will say something so out of pocket that it's like notable enough that I'll go unfollow them on LinkedIn, or at least I'll make a mental note of okay, so this person is of this mind. And I think that's lost on a lot of people. I think that, and this, I don't want to get into the free speech conversation, because that's a whole different conversation. But I think that, to me, what that comes down to is that I think there's a disconnect between people have this idea that they can say anything that they want on Twitter and on LinkedIn and on Facebook and on Instagram, which is totally true. You can, but I think the other side of the coin is you can say whatever you want, but there's ramifications and consequences for certain things that you say. And I think people kind of miss that disconnect. It's like, I can say anything I want with impunity. Well, no, it's not with impunity. Everything you say and everything you put out there on your personal brand, that's going to have an effect, or at least in my opinion, it should.
Yeah. Well, and I think we can kind of maybe land a plane on this idea. One of the things I've learned from Twitter is following reporters is, I'm not a journalist. Someone said something the other day about reporting. I'm like, I don't report anything. I mean, we talk about the news, but I'm not a journalist. I don't have journalistic integrity, or claim to, or that kind of stuff. But one of the things I have learned from Twitter is that, I think, and this would be kind of a good thing, I think, maybe to kind of get your thoughts on and wrap the show up on, is, I've seen a lot of journalists who are very good at what they do. Like, if you read their reporting, listen, there's no such thing as no bias, but it's pretty well encapsulates what happens at this event. So it's not maybe the most fascinating read in the world, but it actually gets you what you're looking for, which is Ben Samuels was here. He said this. He's going to do this. Whatever the 4 or 5 facts of the event were, or the speech were. Boom. That's what I wanted to know. Which then allows good reporters get access to people that we would love to get access to, because they're reporters and they have a platform. And so they get a lot of this almost secret knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes. And I think for reporters, the issue is because they have a lot of secret knowledge, they then presume that they can actually take that knowledge and analyze it and actually say intelligent things about it, which is not the same thing. Reporting on something and commenting on something is not the same thing. Which leads me to what we do. And that's where we have to be careful, I think, Ben, is sometimes is that we have a lot of inside knowledge on deals and things that we have to do. But one of the pitfalls is, earlier I talked about having information. When you have all the information, you tend to think that you know it all, which means that you can make the wrong step in the wrong direction, because you go, I have all the information, or at least I think I do. Therefore, I'm going to try to execute something this way. And much like the reporter, you had a bunch of information, but your analysis was flawed because you didn't step back and analyze it. So how do you kind of avoid that pitfall of having a ton of information, thinking you know it all, but not actually reading the cards right?
I think that's where your network comes in. I think that's the invaluable part of me being able to pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z. What do you think? And getting your feedback, and then doing that same thing with a very small portion of my network that's revolved around whatever that deal is or that subject matter is, and having the ability to kind of bounce the ideas off each other. Because I think the value in, if it was just me, and like you said, if I only had if I had no LinkedIn connections and I didn't have a network, and I was the only one thinking of things, and I was the only one betting the ideas, and I was the only one making the decisions, like, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble quickly that way, right? Because if you make the wrong decision, I mean, so like, there's a good and bad, right? If you make the right decision, it's all on you, but if you make the wrong decision, it's all on you. And I think there's a massive amount of value in having the comfort to be able to reach out to people like yourself, just as a sounding board, and say, hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z, or I heard about, X, Y, or Z, or hey, I heard that, this deal or this operator is working on this, have you heard of the same thing, or what are you hearing? And, bouncing ideas off each other and sharing information to kind of get to that truth.
Yep, and I'll agree with that. The only thing I'll add to it is, I think what you'll find, and this would be this Ryan's 2 cents for listeners, is when you start to bounce things off of people, what you will find is if you actually have a lot of information, not a little bit, but you have a lot of information about something, you will find that a lot of times the objections that are given aren't necessarily the most sound because the person you're asking doesn't actually have all the information. And so they're seeing a very small sliver of the pie, and it becomes almost frustrating because you go to ask people and like, well, they don't, well, okay, hold on. You know about this, and you know about this, you know about this. So part, I think maybe what you're getting at, Ben, is that, and people talk about this a lot, but I think there's actually a lot of substance here, is finding people that you can bounce things off of regularly. And you said that, you kind of blew that, but people you can bounce things off regularly, people that see things differently, because one of the things that people, if you deal with me a lot, you will know that I have certain tendencies, certain things that I'm just going to do a certain way. If we talk one time, you might not know that, but we talk about 15 different things, you're going to go, oh, well, Ryan's getting all excited about this like he always does. Ryan, have you thought about this? Because last time you missed this. And so it is a frustrating process, but I think it's a necessary one. But you have to keep it going. So we go back to, again, quality versus quantity. That's where quantity can really come into play. Is if you're quality can come into play because if you're talking to people who you trust on a regular basis, routinely, you can kind of get this rapport with them that kind of helps you see through things that you wouldn't normally see through.
I mean, you and I are currently doing that, right? I mean, just this morning I was texting you about, hey, based on some feedback on deal flow that we have discussed, I'm going to start doing X. And you said, yeah, that's probably a good idea, and I'll do Y. I mean, that communication only happens if you're consistently, like you said, consistently in contact. But I mean, the goal of what I said was, I want to be. I think I even said, like, I don't want to send you down bad rabbit holes or whatever. So there's a reciprocal. We want to be valuable to each other, and not only that. Now that I understand more about how you work and how you operate, I'm adjusting to address that and to fall in line, which is going to benefit both of us on the back end. And so that's kind of the ongoing communication factor. And that only happens if you're consistently in contact. Is this something I said or something?
No, it's funny because I always tell people I'm a 5-wide, full court press, full steam ahead kind of guy. And today we this isn't, I'm not knocking Ben or Ben's not knocking me. It's just today was kind of one of those things where, okay, hey, this was one of those, Ryan let the hounds out and here we go. And it's like, oh, probably a little too soon, Ryan. Probably shouldn't have thrown you the bone a little too soon.
So, and this is not necessarily specific to this, but I wanted to kind of give a peek behind the curtain on this specific thing, because I think this is something that the listeners will probably be interested in. What Ryan and I were talking about today, and I think one of the things that is needed to be navigated around is, I presented a prospect to Ryan, and I said, hey, I'm working on this. Here's what I know. Here's what we're looking for. Here's the buyer. Here's the asset. Here's the where the money's coming from. And I lined out a lot of the things. The one thing I didn't have is I didn't have some of the paperwork, and I didn't have some of the other things from the actual client. And so, me as the conduit to the client, I can't come up with those things. And so, to a certain degree, we're kind of in a holding pattern until the client comes to the table. And but I didn't say any of that to Ryan on the front end. I didn't tell him that we were still working on something and waiting for a missing piece. And Ryan, as he's wanting to do, and as as his value is, he went out to his market, and within 2 days, he had 7 or 8 different prospects in my inbox that were actionable and ready to be talked about. But we're still waiting on the other side, and so there's a little bit of a stall because of some just kind of cleaning up that we've got to do outside the scope of the deal. And so I think it's important to note that if I had waited until we had all the ducks in a row and you had brought these 7 or 8, we might have a couple of under contract already. And quickly after having this last piece of information that we need from the buyer, quickly after getting that done, we should be able to lock some of these in, right? But it's just about the addressing the fact that I think what I said to you is, I need to work on queuing this up a little bit more before we're ready to really move 100 miles an hour. But that being said, it's really valuable for me to be able to call Ryan and say, hey, this is coming down the pipe. Let's talk about this when the time is right, but just be thinking about where you're going to take this, because then he's ready to go off, get off and running.
Yep, agreed. Okay. All right, Ben. In the meantime, we'll be back, I guess, next week, right? We'll be back next week.
Hey, man, if you're going to have me back, I'll be here.
I'll be back. We'll be back. Same bat time, same bat channel. Anything, listeners, they're listening, connect with you or anything that you want to point them towards before we get off here?
Go check out bringintheclosers.com. That just went live. Ryan finally gave me the okay to put that together, so it's up and running. We're good to go. We should have the first couple episodes uploaded here shortly.
Don't look for a blog. Don't look for a blog.
Don't look for a blog yet. No, don't look for that. The rumor is that Nate is going to be putting the video of these the podcast coming up as well, because we've got some video for you. I know that we've been showing you just the audio, having you kind of get used to Ryan's soothing voice. And now we're gonna have him front and center on the screen. So be ready for that.
Our listenership will go down drastically overnight. Okay, well, I have Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, Energy Week Podcast, Oil and Gas Contractors Connect, where you can hear Ben and I's first ever recorded conversation. I think it's episode 20, 21, somewhere in there. That released a few weeks ago, so you can go hear that. And then, of course, Bringing the Closers is what you're listening to now, and we thank you for that. And we will be back. Oh, hey, Ben, whoa, don't stop yet. Are we going to talk about next week yet? We're gonna be in Midland together next week, willing and dealing, ain't we?
I was waiting for you to talk about it.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, next week, if you're in Midland, you need to hit us up now. We are booking appointments for all kinds of stuff. So, bringingtheclosers@gmail.com, LinkedIn, whatever. We'll be in Midland. I haven't pinned down my dates. Have you pinned down your dates yet?
Looks like Tuesday to Sunday. I'm getting in that late. I'm late on that month, or on Monday, and I'll be there, I believe, Tuesday through the end of the week. Make sure to reach out to us. Ryan and I will grab you a beer or a breakfast taco or something, and we will. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to meet you.
Ben's buying, so just let us know. Steak, preferably for me. And yeah, we'll have everything pinned out for next week. But if you're in Midland, I'll put some on LinkedIn. I'm sure Ben will as well, so you can connect with us there, and we'll get you on the schedule jointly, separately, or whatever the case may be. And we will talk to you next week.